Welcome David Fitzsimmons back, who is now semi-retired. We're very excited to learn about his life in semi-retirement, and I'm sure we're going to hook him in permanently to Ollie here at some point. But he's a pretty busy man, and it's hard to keep up with him. But for those of you who don't know David, he's a cartoonist and columnist for the Arizona Daily Star, where he began drawing cartoons back when Geronimo was just a paper boy, right around 1986. A Pulitzer finalist, Fitz's cartoons are syndicated to over 600 news publications around the world. The Arizona Press Club voted him the best columnist in the state. What do they know? He says, no one in the news or in his audience is safe from his pen when his pen is uncapped. Described as a flaming moderate at the fringe of America's center, Fitz is a snappy dresser who loves reading hate mail from readers and making kids laugh. So, David, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll transition into your presentation here.
Oh, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Scott. And I want to praise Ollie. It is always a pleasure being here with this group. And I have to say that under your leadership, Scott, it is a thriving organization, which is clearly bouncing back. So I congratulate you. And I encourage everyone who's in the audience or listening here or elsewhere to support Ollie. And now on with my piffle, P-I-F-F-L-E. I'm too loud. I am too loud. So say my neighbors where I live. I will try to speak in a quiet voice, which is asking an Irishman to behave contrary to his genetic code. And now to begin. What challenge this is going to be. This is me, David Fitzsimmons, and I am a cartoonist, a columnist, a performer, and one who vexes microphones. In addition, I am, according to one reader, partisaned, biased, and unfair. I would disagree with the characterization of myself as biased, not knowing what that is, but I would agree with the reader in that I am highly partisan, I am highly biased, and I am unfair. If there's any question in your mind about that, behold, this is my sentiment about firearms in the world today. This is my sentiment about what's going on in the world today. The old Republican, the new Republican. Hot ladies, hot up. The President of the United States, who's in danger of becoming the next Jimmy Carter. This cartoon. Further away. There we go. And now I'm even louder. And then there's this cartoon, my response to the George Floyd murder. What were among his final words? I cannot breathe. So I drew this cartoon image. I can't breathe. This cartoon was considered by the Fraternal Order of Police National Vice President to be abhorrent and disgusting, widening the gap between police officers and the youth in our community. Little did he know, nothing pleases me more than ire. The governor of Texas called for the Teachers Association to investigate the educators who distributed my cartoon in their classroom. The social studies department pulled their assignment after the criticism from the governor. And then a free speech coalition defended the school district assignment, comparing police to slave owners which is an inaccurate characterization of the cartoon, but I can't really complain about inaccurate characterizations of information because that's also my job description. I do get email. This is a variety of the kind of hate mail I've gotten in the past. I really like death threats, which are great for my family. When my daughter was young, I'd give her $1 to start my car in the mornings. And some of it is deliciously disgusting. And I save an excerpt here. By the way, slime ball, take your automated reply and shout up that 400-pound ass of yours. I ask you, does this look like a 400-pound ass to you? No. This is typical of the hate mail I get. You're ignorant, I hate you, you look like you need, why don't you take it in the end yourself, you sign, like I wouldn't recognize my mother's handwriting. Come on. I do expect to get mail on a regular basis. I hope for it. And also, we do make mistakes at the newspaper. We are humans. You might have seen the headline, 2 killed, 1 seriously. That was embarrassing. I was born in 1955 when the only thing orbiting the Earth was the moon, according to my bratty 22-year-old son. I was born to these 2 wonderful folks, Artha, who was a taxi dancer when she met Larry, who was a champion boxer and who had enlisted to personally kill Tojo and Hitler. I grew up in a house run by a wonderful master sergeant, and for that, I'm exceptionally grateful. My father was a wonderful dad, and he trained me to be a liberal with self-discipline who could shine his shoes and fold the flag properly. I'm often asked, where to come from? We come from the back of the class. This is a recreation of an image I drew of Mrs. Terry Bagwell, my 7th grade social studies teacher. You may recognize the Antichrist imagery here. Adolescent touch. Well, I often got criticized by my wonderful teacher for misbehaving. And on one occasion, she saved my life by suggesting I direct my talents to joining the yearbook staff in middle school, which I did. Tumbleweed artist. I was such a nerd after that. This is junior high school. I'm editing a publication called A Kaleidoscope, and I'm nagging my fellow students. Did you vote like the whole school depended upon it? What a nerd, what a harangue. Yeah, this is the time period when I was a kid in school. Air raid sirens going off every noon on Saturdays. Elementary school, dive under your desk. That would save you from an atomic bomb blast. And then along came the war in Vietnam. Dad. There we go. And I found happiness here in Rincon High School, working for the school newspaper, The Echo, and also working for an off-campus paper started by a friend of mine who became a county attorney in Santa Cruz County. The publication was called The Frumious Bandersnatch. And I drew anti-war cartoons. And I later found out through the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI actually had a file on we high school threats to democracy. I was so proud of that, but I did not share that with the master sergeant. At the same time in the Civil Air Patrol. I loved the military life in spite of my liberal bent. And also I thought, hey, if I'm going to be drafted, I better know a skill like flying. Well, the Vietnam War was growing more and more tragic and more heartbreaking. I was then attending the University of Arizona studying art. And both of my brothers, Don and Bob, who referred to me as obnoxious puke, both returned from their tours of duty in Vietnam. And they both admonished me, don't participate in the war. They both returned opposed to the war. And in fact, they joked with me, you're the kind of kid who'd be killed first day out by his own men. Thanks, Bob and Don. So, geez, into working for the school newspaper, the Arizona Daily Wildcat. And I'm proud to say a million years later, I'm a member of their Hall of Fame. This is my first editorial cartoon I drew for them 1,000 years ago when Gerald Ford was president. When I graduated, I desperately wanted one job, to be an editorial cartoonist. At the time, there were 300 working in the United States. Today, I am one of 17. Well, it makes sense in a way. We are practicing a 17th century medium. So I graduated, there were no openings. So I made murals, t-shirts, logo designs, advertising art, billboards, magazine illustrations, sign painting, art supply sales. I even taught art. But still, I desperately want to be a political cartoonist. And I landed my dream job at the Oklahoma City Times. God sent me there because growing up here, God felt I had not experienced enough white people. I was a maps and graphic newsroom artist there, still suffering, longing to be a political cartoonist, still sending out my resume, still drawing cartoons. And I hit pay dirt when I landed a job at the Virginian Pilot, not as a political cartoonist, but as a page designer and an art director. I did hit pay dirt because I made friends with another editorial writer, a young guy working at the paper where I was working, Tony Snow. Can't explain the magic of it, but we hit it off, best buds. Tony Snow was an editorial writer for the Virginian Pilot. I was an art director. Tony Snow was a bit conservative. I was a flaming liberal. Tony Snow, I recognize his name. He grew up eventually to become press secretary in the White House to President George W. Bush. Tony, when he was young, my coworker quit his job at the Pilot and got a job at a competing paper across the bay called the Daily Press, a wretched newspaper, a horrible newspaper. And he said, "You want to work for me? You want to be a political cartoonist at last?" What? Tony, I said, "You are to the right of Attila the Hun." He said, "Yeah, well, you're to the left of Leon Trotsky. We'll have fun." You know, it was a much different era in the United States of America back then. And we did have fun. This is how wretched the Daily Press news is. When I worked there, I found out that William Styron had worked there in his youth. This book he wrote is about the family that owned the Daily Press, locked down in darkness. Well, 84, it was the rise of the religious right. This is a cartoon of Reagan and the Republicans intervening in public school life. Walter Mondale survived Gary Hart, only to be creamed. And in Virginia, I fell in love with the history of our American Revolution, and the Constitution is taught to me by a naval commander in a night class. And I also learned that my fourth great-grandfather, Isham, was a member of the 4th Colonial Regiment who served at Princeton, Brandywine, and Valley Forge. I am a son of the American Revolution. His great-grandson, James, my second great-grandfather, served in Company D in the Union, on the right side of history. And I find it fascinating that those gentlemen on my mother's side of the family created the republic that benefited my father's side of the family, the immigrants who would seek refuge here in the 1860s and 1870s from the starvation in Ireland. So it's no wonder that in Washington, the biggest thrill of my time in Virginia was visiting the Capitol and the Library of Congress and holding in my very hands the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated. In 1989, the Arizona Daily Star finally hired me after centuries of begging. Paper boy, here's your paper. This is my first editorial cartoon drawn in '85 for the January 1st, '86 edition. I was a little preoccupied with the terror approaching the world as a growing issue in '86. This is our staff. It looks like cast extras for Woodstock or City Council of Bisbee. I'm not sure which. I was happy to return because I love Tucson and its diversity. Know what I love about the All Souls procession? The costumes. What costumes? My guiding principle has always been fear no idea. Perfect example of this, Black Lives Matter. I love it when Americans bitch and whine about protest. I love it when I see any protest in America. That is our democratic republic talking to itself fearlessly. It is a blessing to see any and all and any sort of protest. Black Lives Matter. These folks only had the Bill of Rights backing up their behavior. In the beginning, there was printmaking. Cartoonists always have to talk about Daumier because we love to pronounce his name incorrectly. Daumier. This is called the legislature. I can't tell if this was done in the 18th century or if this is Phoenix, Arizona, just last week. I think it's last week. Yeah. Wow, there are some pine nuts in that deliberative body. Wow. Well, he got into trouble because he drew a likeness of King Louis Philippe, drew him as a pear. Now, in French idiomatic language, this is to call a person an idiot or a fool, no better than a fruit. Well, King Louis wasn't happy. Daumier got thrown into the Bastille. Now, this is the kind of thing that excites we political cartoonists. We all dream of being martyred by a crazed, upset reader, or better yet, the Bastille. 76. Apollo Revoir is hard at work. The silversmith is tapping away. Paul Revere is hard at work drawing cartoons for broadsides, inciting revolution. This is his most famous cartoon, The Bloody Massacre, depicting the massacre of the Bostonians, the rabble, by British soldiers who were antagonized and later defended in court by, that's right, what idea. He believed in upholding the law. Strange. El Great Revolutionary, Benito Franklin, my favorite. Old Ben, a cartoonist. Famous for this image. We all saw it in junior high and high school, right? Now, the wonderful thing about this is not only its message, but the penalty. Under martial law, if he'd been caught, he would have been drawn and quartered in a public square. That's a big deal. Well, it was a revolution that inspired at one time. Tiananmen Square, 1989. Look at that beautiful statue in the back, turning around and facing and defying Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Party, the goddess of democracy. Well, some individuals, some communities, some republics, some authoritarians believe you can crush an idea with tanks and with violence. Fear no idea, because you can't kill a good idea. Iran, very recently. Do you remember the protests, the election protests in Tehran? I followed them on Twitter. It was horrifying as the people were protesting and being fired upon by fools who believed that they could kill a good idea. These ideas endure in the human spirit. Our revolutionaries grasped that over 2 centuries ago. And now a cartoon hero, Thomas Nast of Harper's Weekly. I love to ask school kids, how often was it published? He's famous for this drawing of Boss Tweed, a corrupt political boss in New York City, the boss of a machine called the Tammany Hall machine, and depicting a politician with brains of money rather than a heart and soul like a normal human being. It's amazing the reforms this cartoon brought about, how today politics is free of the influence of money. He also made widely popular images we take for granted. The elephant, Nast created the elephant as the symbol of the Republican Party because Nast used the symbol of a raging tiger as the symbol of corruption. When the Republicans came to run, his logic was the only creature that could take on a tiger in the subcontinent could be an Asian elephant. So make the Republicans elephants. He then, there they are, the Republican elephant. And he made popular the image of the working class symbol, the mule, the jackass, as the icon for the Democratic Working Man's Party. And he brought with him from Bavaria this communist interloper, this invader of our homes once a year, St. Nicholas. There's a reason St. Nicholas dresses the way he does. I always ask school kids this question. No one seems to know. You go back to Bavaria, from whence Thomas Nast sprang, and you will see in the 1860s, men loved to wear bright red with white fur brim and leather boobs. But I have no clue what was in that pipe. And now a cartoon censorship villain. Governor Samuel Pennypacker, 1902. Phew. Man was a crook, a thief, controlled by criminal interests. And he looked very much like a bird. He hated these cartoons being drawn as a bird by just about every cartoonist in Pennsylvania, and particularly by this cartoonist in Philadelphia. He hated them. He went to his lawmakers and he proposed a cartoon censorship bill. It passed and it was signed into law. It criminalized the publication of any publication publishing any and all cartoons depicting elected officials as animals. That means I couldn't draw any politicians as jackasses, snakes, weasels. The response? Well, newspapers referred to this as the Politicians Protection Act. And one newspaper in particular ran a cartoon by Charles Whelan, the notorious cartoonist that upset Pennypacker in the first place, depicting Pennypacker drawn as a fruit. It defied the law. It was beloved. Every other cartoonist in the land flooded their newspapers with images of Pennypacker drawn as anything but an animal, and he was not reelected. That's how Americans deal with issues. Once upon a newspaper far away published irreverent, sacrilegious cartoons, and the world went mad. These are the 12 cartoons of Muhammad that were used as an excuse by a cleric of a subsect in Egypt to enrage his followers at a mosque and riot, and the riots spread throughout the Middle East over these cartoons. And it led to an attack on Charlie Hebdo, a French magazine out of Paris, Journal Irresponsable, on January 7th, 2015, by two gentlemen who killed 12 individuals, including 9 Charlie Hebdo cartoonists and writers. I'm internationally syndicated, and this is relevant to that. I'm syndicated by Cable Cartoons Incorporated. My stuff shows up in Funny Times, the Washington Post, LA Times. My favorite is Chinese Daily. Over 1 billion subscribers. The Washington Post. I love this one because this irritated people in Washington itself about Kavanaugh. On my way to Paris to a cartoonist conference, I learned from my syndicate that the most reprinted cartoon is this cartoon depicting Muhammad. We've avenged you. No one will dare to publish a cartoon of you ever again. These people are insane. That was so comforting to know it was widely distributed throughout France just before I should arrive at an international gathering. And just that summer, I had participated in a panel discussion on the cartoons at the University of Arizona. Had a lovely conversation with a wonderful young man from Egypt who is conservative, very religious. And he explained to me how uncomfortable it made him feel. And I understood and respected his views. But then I asked him if he'd ever seen The Simpsons. And I explained how accustomed we Americans are to irreverence, how sacrilegious we are. It's everywhere in our vulgar, obscene culture. And he said he watched it once and was thoroughly offended and disgusted. At which point I invited him to stick around to watch South Park, which, by the way, at its opening depicts Muhammad and had for years, long before Charlie Hebdo.
What a great conference in that wonderful palace with lots of security. There we were. Cartoonist, refugee, exiled from his own land. Cartoonist, refugee, exiled from his own land. Cartoonist, exiled from his own land. I went down to Saint-Just-les-Martel that following week to attend a gathering of 300 cartoonists in this small village for a international salon in the middle of flipping nowhere by train. We traveled to visit with 300 other cartoonists and hang out in a high school because there was nothing else in this small village. And I traveled with friends of ours, Imad and his wife, Lena. Imad is a cartoonist from Amman, Jordan, who is, wow, I don't know if I should say this if it's widely distributed. He's not as devout as he should be, but he's trying, I'm sure. And I explained to him here in Arizona, we have a term for Mormons who aren't pious. We call them Jack Mormons, to which he said, oh, David, I must be a Jack Muslim. Then here he is. I enjoyed his company because his wife had a magical purse that somehow had full champagne glasses in it. The backstory is Imad and Osama, these Jordanian cartoonists, are very brave. They've both been in and out of prison many times in the course of their careers. And we met at a gathering in Mexico City, where it seems a real bragging point was whether or not you've been shot at or had been in prison. And all I could claim was I got one restraining order. This is Saint-Just-les-Martel, the wonderful village where we were hosted by the wonderful, humble folks in that village. And this is Claude, my host, who is a retired middle school teacher who wanted to tell me, my American friend, that he had just, for the first time in his life, visited the American cemetery at Normandy. And he wanted to thank me for our American efforts during the Second World War to liberate his nation. And I pointed out how touching this was, since there was a Captain Fitzsimmons who did perish as soon as, boom, the door for the landing craft came down. And then I thanked him for Lafayette and his assistance, their assistance during our revolution. I thanked him for the Statue of Liberty, but mostly I wanted to thank him for their greatest contribution to civilization, Brigitte Bardot. This is what cartoonists do when they gather. We draw each other. And we solve the world's problems. At this table are 2 Israeli cartoonists, 3 Arab world cartoonists. I heard them solve all the problems in the Middle East. Key ingredient, none of them were religious. The winner of the greatest cartoon, as judged by this group, wins a cow because it was a dairy village. I did not win the cow. Every year a cartoonist does win. One year, this cartoonist in '94 was so proud, he took his cow up to the Eiffel Tower. Rose, Akram Raslan, lovely man from Syria, who drew this cartoon depicting Assad as a mouthpiece of military violence. What became of him? Died in prison, according to reports. Another cartoonist hero, Ali Farazat, met this guy. What a handsome, cheerful guy, right? Here's a cartoon about his homeland. Nothing is safe, not even your thoughts. Thugs hired by Assad crushed his hands. He recovered somewhat. Within a week from his hospital bed, he drew a self-portrait and tweeted this defiant image to the world. I gotta say, in a way, this is as beautiful as Lady Liberty's torch. It has the same defiant message within it. You can't kill a good idea. Athena Farghadani from Iran, lovely, bright student, was not happy with the election results. She drew the ballot counters as monkeys and goats. She was tried and she received a sentence of 12 years. 12 years plus time, because when she stood, she shook hands with a male attorney in the courtroom. She was asked to seat herself again and receive the additional sentence. She only had to serve 18 months, thanks to Amnesty International. We must all be vigilant. We must all speak out on behalf of each other. This is a story about ink and paper. This is my most favorite hero. I had an opportunity to visit Munich with friends who were picking up their foreign exchange student. And I desperately had always wanted to visit Munich because I wanted to visit the southern part of Germany, because during the rise of the Nazis, Bavaria was the hotbed of the rise of the Nazis. And I was fascinated in particular by Munich. Why Munich? And I was also, I've confessed it to my wife, in love with a heroic figure. So I had to visit the University of Munich to see the site, the place where Sophie Magdalena Scholl was a student. I think in 1941, she was a student through 43. She was a kindergarten teacher at the time, and she practiced good trouble. 1941, she was 19. Her brother Hans had returned from Stalingrad. She and he both decided Hitler and Nazism was not good for Germany. And so she created the White Rose Resistance. And it was here where the Gestapo met in a conference in 1943 behind these doors, a national gathering, that she decided to lay down a ream of broadsides she had written critical of the Nazis behind those very doors. They emerged when the bell rang, much to her surprise, and she ran. Her timing had been off. She ran and she was captured on these steps, and she was arrested and she was tried in a trial. This is from a film about her life. That was a show trial broadcast on Germany's national radio for all to hear her being insulted and harangued by these judges. And also her brother, a professor, and other members of the resistance were tried. She was sentenced to death. She was found guilty of treason against the state. And at 5 o'clock that afternoon, she was taken to the basement of the building and she was guillotined. 4 words for ink on paper, like cartoonists who perish, for ink on paper, for ideas. Fear a society that fears ideas. I also believe they don't endure. Societies that fear ideas, they don't last. Outside the University of Munich, there's a beautiful fountain. And I noticed, it was I didn't notice, it was pointed out to me by our German host. You can't find symbols of the Nazis anywhere in Munich. Maybe on the ceiling of one art museum. That is it. It is gone. No symbols of the Nazis. However, at the foot of this fountain, at the entrance to the university, it appears a student has dropped his or her homework and it's windblown across the entryway to the museum. To the university. And if you look closer, you will see that these are not homework from today, but rather these are the words of Sophie Scholl, her broadsides, bronzed for eternity to endure the test of time in the cobblestone outside the University of Munich. And this was pointed out to me by our friend, was her death notice. But her words live on. After her death, friends and associates smuggled out the words of her broadsides, and they were airdropped all over Germany in the course at the end of the Second World War. You go, Sophie Magdalena Scholl, such a brave woman. Another cartoonist hero on our side during that war, one of the great soldiers, Bill Malden, who drew these GIs, Willie and I think Bill is his name, scruffy guys. Bill Malden, very popular, picked on the army officers, didn't worry that much about Tojo or Hitler. This was his most beloved cartoon, the soldier dispatching his beloved Jeep to paradise. Private Bill Malden's editor did not like his cartoons criticizing the officers, nor pointing out those times when morale was low. His editor was General George Blood and Guts Patton, who said to him, "Do you think your cartoons will be welcome in the Nazi army or the Russian army?" To which young, courageous Private Malden responded, "Isn't that the point, General?" Indeed. Malden's most famous cartoon, some of you might recognize this from your childhood, November 23, 63, the death of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Wordless, powerful, expressive, every cartoonist's ideal delivery system. Another cartoonist hero, Theodore Geisel, great political cartoonist. What? Who? Yeah, Dr. Seuss. I guess before he got his medical degree. Here's one of his cartoons depicting Hitler as a blind rhino in a cage. Cages cost money, buy US savings bonds and stamps. Seuss was always political. I loved reading him to my kids. This book is my favorite political tract. Horton Hears a Who. We are here, we are here, we are here, we are here. And as Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel explained, this book is actually about folks in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saying, we are here, we are here, we are here. You may not see us, but remember us. They have a way of sneaking into our psyches and irritating us. Jerry Falwell talks about his first time. This was a satirical ad in the back of Hustler magazine, a magazine, I know, ladies, ask your male partners, they will deny ever having seen this vile publication. And it's a vile ad, it's not that funny, and it describes pretty much what you would expect. But Jerry Falwell's legal team sued Larry Flint for gazillions of dollars, causing the good Reverend emotional stress. Interesting legal angle, right? Went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supremes ruled. These are the 3 liberal justices. Stop in the name of satire. If you can sue me for causing you emotional stress, goodbye Saturday Night Live, Mad Magazine, Rush Limbaugh, and that amazing, hilarious satirist, Tucker Carlson. So, City 2018, I'm at a conference celebrating Latin American journalists who've been shot at. It's called the firing line for their journalism. My cartoons were also displayed at the Museum of Memory and Tolerance in Mexico City. I just love this piece of artwork made from assault weapons. This is what a group of cartoonists look like, and there are women in the group. It's a coincidence. And I want to point this guy here, Pedro Molina, could not return to Nicaragua after this gathering. And he also said to me, David, please stop speaking Spanish. You are speaking like a toddler. It irritates us. I love you, man. What a great guy. This woman here, horrific figure, often in trouble in her homeland, Nadia Kari from Tunisia, who created this character, Willis. This character was used to voice the views of those who supported the Arab Spring, which sprang out of Tunisia. Liberty, manacled. This character is very popular, distributed throughout the Middle East. As far as I know, she's still free today, but phew, courage. San Francisco, 2014. Why is he bragging about this? Oh, because there was a show called Slinging Satire, the cartoon actor. No. Oh, because he got to see his wife say, oh, no. Or because he got interviewed? No. Another cartoonist, exiled from his homeland. Remember Imad Nassam Hajjaj? August 2020. I get an email. Ahmad Hajjaj was arrested on Wednesday. He faces possible 5-year prison sentence for the cybercrime of insulting an Arab country. Another country, the United Arab Emirates country, had made a deal with Israel, and Israel went ahead in defiance of their bargain and purchased, I believe, fighter jets. So he drew Israel as the dove of peace, spitting on the face of the Prime Minister of the United Arab Republic, United Arab Emirates. And I thought it was a wonderful cartoon, but apparently the government of Jordan decided it wasn't wonderful, so he was arrested. I was shocked and disheartened because I knew he and his wife personally, and we had FaceTimed each other quite a bit. And I'd seen that he has obnoxious teenage sons just like I do. And his brother sent me this image of him being taken away to jail. And why wouldn't an authoritarian leader arrest any member of the press around the world, particularly after our American president declared the press is the enemy of the people? Why should the Middle East, why should Saudi Arabia give one flying scimitar about a Washington Post analyst or writer who was butchered in the embassy in Turkey? Because, you know, the press is the enemy of the people. I have had such dark thoughts these past couple of years. I am ashamed of my dark thoughts about our leadership. So, campaign, Free Mod, it snowballed throughout the world. Other groups got involved, censorship groups, amnesty groups, and within a period of time, within 3 weeks, he was freed from prison. And his sentence was reduced to, I believe, half a year to a year, and then it got reduced even farther down. And then I got this beautiful note. Thank you. I really appreciate your support. I'm reading now what I've missed during my stay in prison. I want to thank you for everything. And unfortunately, I don't have the email I didn't keep, which noted, hey, maybe someday with you in the United States, you might face prison and I might return the favor to you. What? Yeah, goodbye. Oh, Arizona. I love being a cartoonist in Arizona. This has been paradise for me. This is, it's a self-described tip of the spear of the lunatic Tea Party Trump movement. My favorite, the cyber ninjas. To be a real life cyber ninja? Ain't ninjas sneaky assassins? Who are we assassinating? Democracy. And I get hammered by my friends on the right because I love to beat the Nazi analogy to death. But for me, it's the most accurate. Maybe it's because I was a nerd scholar of the rise of the movement when I was a kid, and I'm fascinated by Germany in the 30s. But the parallels are so readily apparent. We have minority groups scapegoated, Jews part of a vast conspiracy, gays now threatened, individuals' rights, medical rights being subtracted. We have a party of fascist authoritarians that have relied on violence and thuggery to achieve and hold on to power. Not unlike in Germany was a democratic republic. It took the Nazi party 3 tries at their Congress to occupy enough seats to then point the finger at the communists, launch violence, burn the Reichstag, take over their country. We've already had our Reichstag burning in a sense. And it couldn't come at a better time for the world itself as we face some new virus, religious fanaticism, and climate change. I struggle to be optimistic because I have beautiful grandchildren, and I am optimistic for their sakes. There are still heroes among us. I want to close out with these 2 before I take questions. I was in Vancouver very recently, well, in partial defiance of my cardiologist. I have a stent that's a month old. And I felt so wonderful after my 2nd lease on life. I show up at my cardiologist's office 2 days later. You know, I know you want me to go to cardiac rehab, but couldn't I go to Canada and climb mountains instead? She knew she couldn't stop me. So my wife and I went, and we went to Vancouver, and we scaled great peaks. But for me, the high point, the highest point, was visiting the University of British Columbia campus to see the Anthro Museum, and then walking back and coming upon in the distance on a green, a beautiful likeness of a stunning statue I recognize because I had drawn this figure so many times, the goddess of democracy. This was a large-scale replica of the statue. It's one of only 2 in our hemisphere that was constructed, assembled by art students in Tiananmen Square in 1989, where according to a recent BBC report from 2017, rather than just 1,000 students being killed, estimates are over 10,000 students were butchered by the government of the Communist Party of China. And what I saw at the base of this statue were a number of people, quiet, meditating, and I spoke to a couple, sharing my awe and my ignorance. I was unaware I was there on the 33rd anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and that's why Andrew and Wei Sao were there, who introduced themselves, and we had a wonderful conversation, and we hit it off. And our most recent exchange by email was the other day where he said, "You live on an acre? Do you have horses?" No, I don't have horses. Andrew's a very impressive guy. Mr. Zhao is an international businessman, speaks better English than I do. And he and his wife were both 18-year-old freshmen at a teaching university in Beijing. And he was at Tiananmen Square, where he dragged bodies to hospitals. He had a young female student die in his arms, begging for her mother. And we ended up talking the entire afternoon away about the fate of democracies around the world. And he was sunny, and he was positive, and he was realistic, but he was optimistic. And it struck me how he shared the same fundamental belief I did. Fear no idea. And democracy is an idea that will just well out of humanity one way or another. I asked if he had a message for Americans. He said, "Keep showing your sincere concern for the well-being of others like before and now. Continue to lead the world to protect democracy, freedom, and peace. We need you to take the lead of the direction of human civilization. We are counting on you." There are heroes among us. They were there on January 6th. These four gentlemen, you saw them testify before the committee at the very beginning of their hearings. I drew a cartoon describing them as America's thin blue line on January 6th. Sergeant Gunnell, Officer Fanon, Officer Harges, and Sergeant Dunn. I drew them as patriots, calling to mind the patriots of our idealistic revolution. Well, this cartoon got quite a few shares online, and I get an email. "Hi, just want to drop you a line, say I enjoyed your blue line piece and want to thank you. It's a bit vain. I don't expect this sort of thing to happen again. Inshallah. Do you know how I could go about buying a print or four? I might see about giving the others a copy. Thank you, Daniel Hodges." The name was familiar. Officer Daniel Hodges, one of the four men who had testified. Of course, I sent him a copy. I sent him a copy of my book. We had a couple of exchanges. I was surprised to learn how much he loved Calvin and Hobbes. He drew me a drawing, making fun of me, drawing the little quail figure with my name on it. And in one of our exchanges, he says, "One must believe that most people are decent, no matter how else it may seem sometimes. Remember, this is the officer who was crushed between the doors by the insurrectionists. We must believe that most people are decent. And despite working a job where my daily workload is directly proportional by how awful humanity is, I believe it to be true." And then I get this in the mail, signed by the four officers and Eugene Goodman, the heroic officer who offered himself up as bait, luring murderous insurrectionists away from elected representatives. He added with this note, "Hey, that CNN bit was so short, it's barely worth all the setup." That was an interview with Jake Tapper he'd just done. But it was very cool to do it in Statuary Hall. "I'm glad this year has been more peaceful. So far, so good. So far, so good." I'm Dave Fitzsimmons. You can find me on Facebook under the name David Wayne Fitzsimmons. Here's where I post is this clown. Now that Republicans have made all American women second-class citizens, they may as well roll back their right to vote. That is, if they hope to continue to exist after November. I also have a Twitter feed under the name David Wayne Fitzsimmons, excuse me, under DW Fitz Tuner, DW Fitz Tuner. Mark Twain said sacred cows make the best hamburger. After my stint, I prefer plant-based meatless sacred cow burgers, no fat, pure satirical protein. And the Arizona Daily Star, where you can find me at Tucson.com. And every holiday season, check out the Rialto downtown. Usually a week or so before the holidays, I produce a holiday radio show. That's a fundraiser for every cause I can think of. Thank you for being such a patient, good audience, and I am happy to entertain questions from you now.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it. And if we have questions, Allison's going to help run a mic for us in here, and then I will take questions online. So go ahead and raise your hands and in the room there, and we'll jump in. And if you have questions, please put them into the chat and I'll bring you on momentarily.
Thank you very much, David, for doing this. And in yesterday's newspaper, your little column, I should say your big column, mentioned about how you're not going to be doing political cartoons because of Kagel News getting rid of editorials and editorial cartoonist. Is that,
Thank you.
I didn't understand that whole thing exactly, but yes.
Well.
Is that-
Huh?
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. To be clear, Kagel cartoon. The story is this: Kagel Cartoons received a notice from one of their major purchasers of their cartoonists and columnists that they would no longer be using cartoons or columnists because they're no longer relying on opinion pages. They're no longer producing opinion pages. Gannett owns 1/4 of America's newspapers, and they've already done away with a lot of opinion pages in their newspapers because they are provocative and controversial, and because they fear ideas. Fear for the Republic, where ideas are feared. I am so fortunate and so blessed to work for the Arizona Daily Star, a newspaper under the management of our executive editor, Jill Jordan Spitz, which will never abandon its opinion pages and views its opinion pages as a very important, significant part of their newspaper, including this cartoonist who's enjoying semi-retirement almost as much as I'm enjoying semi-working. But yeah, I think I will continue to draw cartoons and to write as long as I have breath. At least I promised my wife that this Sunday morning when I woke up next to her. And I thought to myself, I'd always been a fundraiser and supporter for Planned Parenthood for a number of reasons. But one reason I never gave much thought to was the reason that hit me like a profound brick between the eyes Sunday morning when I woke up to my life partner, who is now a second-class citizen, my legal inferior, an individual with fewer rights than I am blessed to have in this country. So yeah, as long as I have breath, I will use my voice, particularly to speak out for those who do not have a voice. Good question. Thank you.
We've got a question from Rod Norrish. If you'd like to unmute yourself out there and ask your question. Rod, can you hear? There you go. You're on.
I'm just wondering if there's anything that is out of bounds in terms of subject matter among cartoonists in the US and also internationally.
That is a wonderful question. The first thought that came to my mind was related to the issue of reproductive rights. What I still feel, what is out of bounds for those of us who are published in mainstream daily publications is the kind of imagery that directly addresses the issue of reproductive rights. I so want to draw the Supreme Court justices between a woman's legs. I so want to draw a naked man bitching about having to wear a mask, bitching that a mask infringes his rights. I want to draw that man with a shaft of the Supreme Court gavel up his reproductive organs. But I am prevented by taste from executing that kind of imagery, which I think is more direct. But in terms of content, I like to think that nothing is out of bounds for me. If the Arizona Daily Star will not run an image, my syndicate will run it. If the syndicate will not run it, I will post it online. I will post it on Twitter, and I will try to post it on Instagram. But that's a very good question. Thank you for that question.
Any other questions in the room? What? You're out of practice. Here we go.
I'm kind of surprised because I look out this room, I see a room full of students who had to have gotten into trouble when they were middle schoolers in the back of the class, drawing Lord knows what. Happy to take your question.
Well, first as a comment, yesterday reading the Times, I was so despondent with what I was reading. I thought, I'll read Fitzsimmons' column today. Oh, what a downer that was.
That's a fair comment.
Yeah.
I promised my editor that I would draw that. I promised next week's column will be funny, but then I changed my mind because next week's column is going to be about meeting Andrew and how much his values resonate with our Independence Day. It was just so heartening. It was heartening. It wasn't a knee slapper, but it was heartening. I am working on a humorous column about a class full of poor students asking questions about water in Arizona with humorous answers, trying to laugh at the, oh my goodness, the drought of humor that faces us. Yeah.
The other thing is, this is showing my age, in identifying political cartoonists around the world, you didn't mention her book.
Yes. I wish I had, I could talk for hours about this subject. When I was 13, I wrote him a letter, fan letter. I got a hand lettered response. Can't find it to this day. Cannot find this damn wonderful prize, but it was so heartening. And in a way, I could always blame him for my obsession with being a political cartoonist. My belief I could be a political cartoonist, which was absurd even when I was a kid in college. Only 250 jobs that year. None had died or retired. I remember the master sergeant telling me, good career choice. Why didn't you think about maybe becoming a gargoyle carver?
Well, the number he did on Joe McCarthy was amazing.
One of the things about Herblock is how his cartoons truly were a history of that time, as well as being snappy, funny, brutal, hard, great cartoons. If you look at his cartoons, they are a history of what was happening in this country at that time. And I have to say, when I have looked at his cartoons, I hate to double back to something that's a little bit disheartening. A fan gave me a clip file, a collection of newspaper clippings from various newspapers around the country, dating from 1938 to 1945, just clippings of cartoons, wartime cartoons. And as I'm looking at these wonderful, profound cartoons, I'm thinking, that's the role of the cartoonist, to point with alarm, shock, and despair as the world goes to hell nonetheless. But at least we serve as an eyewitness to history in one regard, in certain aspects, as Herblock did. It's interesting to see the crimes that Herblock pointed out with effective outrage are the same kind of crimes that are occurring today. A great man, a great thinker, great voice. Yes, miss.
So at one time you had written in the paper that you were, or maybe in a talk, you were responsible for picking the cartoons and the political cartoons and some of the columnists.
Mhm.
Is it difficult to pick ones that are opposite your point of view?
Here is why. Well, let me back up and say, part of being semi-retired is I got to shirk that responsibility and pass it off to a younger colleague. But it wasn't hard to find political cartoonists who didn't share my views. I have a number who are friends of mine, like Gary McCoy or Scott Standis. In fact, he's come to Tucson and I've gone to Chicago Loyola to participate in mock debates, which are a great joy. But what is challenging was to find conservative cartoonists whose cartoon was not premised on disinformation or wasn't premised on a lie, which is kind of makes my hair stand on end when I say that aloud. But yeah, that was such a concern. Years pass, and I see it particularly this year. You know, I'll see a cartoon that is, its premise is the disinformation that we all suffer from, which calls to mind a story. I was talking to my brilliant daughter the other day. She lives with her husband in Phoenix, 3 beautiful children. And she was laughing about how you never know. When she got COVID and my granddaughter got COVID, she had 2 neighbors come over offering them ivermectin. And she said, it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You just don't know. But the disinformation is widespread. It's appealing. It's attractive. I'm pessimistic about our political future in the short run because of the appeal of the disinformation. But in the long run, I'm happy to know that political authoritarians always overreach and there will be a reaction maybe by the end of the decade. Happy talk, huh? What's for lunch? No, so I'd be happy to take another question.
We've got another question from our online audience. Neil Peterson, if you want to unmute yourself, and you are on, Neil, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, Neil.
Yeah, hi there, Fitz. Thanks for doing this. My question is, how do we get back to a place where we have a village commons where philosophical extremes can meet in the middle? And what do you think would happen if Fox News and maybe MSNBC, if we went back to requiring equal time for opposing viewpoints? Those are my questions.
I'm glad you bring that up. You bring up something that is a point I love to make in conversations about this subject. The Fairness Doctrine. After the Fairness Doctrine was scuttled during the Reagan administration, that's when right-wing radio surfaced and Rush Limbaugh became king of the airwaves. The Fairness Doctrine. It was done away with. And the communication systems became flooded with right-wing propaganda where there was no accountability one to the other. When I was a kid growing up here in Tucson, the university sponsored a wonderful thing called the Sunday Forum. And the Sunday Forum would be a place where folks would discuss politics and news of the day on Sunday afternoons and debate issues. As a young kid, I was dragged to this event and it infected me. And I thought years later how great a town hall would be in every community where one could hear opposing views. Too often, these opposing views live, work, and think in isolation. An example of this is my good friend, I will mention here, who drew for the San Diego Union, Steve Kelly, who now is the cartoonist for the Pittsburgh Gazette, I think. He came to Tucson for a mock debate. We had a conversation. Hey, I had bladder cancer at the time. What happens if I lose my job? I'd lose my insurance. What happens to me? Well, you should just plan for those things, said my friend who had now become arch conservative. Later, I heard him say, I asked my son, son, he's a student at the school, what's the most oppressed minority in the United States? And I'm so proud of my son, Dave. You know what he told me? He said, white men are the most oppressed minority in the United States. I had no response other than to think how isolated this man must be to feel safe about sharing that view publicly, as though he's a great revolutionary. Because when I saw him speaking in front of a group of college students, it was much different. And when I saw him speak at the Jewish Community Center alongside me, when he began to speak in his serious tone about his perspective, I couldn't believe the line of people who lined up to question him afterwards. And he was taken aback by it because he's isolated, as are the Fox News people, isolated in their own news silo. So my thought is, perhaps an actual in-person forum where individuals could gather in their community in front of each other in a shared space to discuss these issues. And fully armed as well, because I also believe in natural selection. That's my way of giggling and chuckling my way through a problem, which I believe almost has an insoluble quality at this point, which I might leave to smarter, younger individuals than myself to address these questions. Other questions?
We've got a question from Marine Bike online. Marine, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Maureen.
And
I am muted. Can you hear me now?
we can hear you.
Okay. So Fitz, I love listening to everything you say. I love your cartoons. You're spot on, and sticking my tongue out at everybody who doesn't agree with you. I was talking to a OBGYN friend of mine, and we both came up with this idea, and I'd like your comment on it. I'll bet that Roe versus Wade would not have been overturned if there was an addendum added by SCOTUS that the men have to pay for the upbringing of that child.
Oh,
The minute you bring the men into it and their responsibility, this would not have been an issue, and the other half of the human race would have their rights like you do. And that was a beautiful comment you made about your wife.
well, thank you. That is a very fair and strong point. Along with that, I would also suggest, if one believes life begins at conception, that mandatory reversible vasectomies for all 18-year-olds would be a good idea.
Perfect.
Because I think, what you hit upon here is so significant. Men cannot relate to this idea of their physical persons, their bodies not being inviolate, that it's their sovereign space. It's a remarkable time. It's jarring. I'm struggling to think of jokes I've written about it the past couple of days, but some things just leave me so angry and befuddled by the turn our great democratic republic has taken. Thank you for that comment. Cheered me up. You go, girl.
Bronx.
Bronx, yeah.
Anne has a question right here.
Hi, Ann.
Yes. Early in your presentation, as some of the photographs went flying by, I thought I saw that your cartoons run in the China Daily.
I've had,
And was that for real?
yeah, I've had papers run in the China Daily, and the one I did include, it kind of amused me because it was about the death of newspapers. So it's just for a cartoon about the death of newspapers to run in a newspaper that always jokingly says, our circulation, 1 gazillion. It's fun to have your cartoons distributed worldwide. A couple of years ago, I got a text from a teacher in Singapore who wanted to know if I'd do a remote to sing up to the students in Singapore. That was thrilling. Let's see. Oh, in France, where my cartoons would be reprinted in the Parisian Review. That was flattering. Things I never imagined. A kid growing up in the South Side, 5216 27th Street here in Tucson, Arizona, Just, I've had such a fortunate life as a smart mouth teenager at the dinner table, as my mother would say, who taught me to have a great sense of humor, particularly as she went through her experience with cancer. When she had breast cancer and she had a fake boob. I remember on one occasion, she was upset with my mouthing off at the dinner table, and she reached into her blouse, took out this pink blobbing sphere. Boom! Bam!
What trauma?
Right. Yeah, most kids would have been traumatized, but not, no, right after that, she says, a boob for a boob. Okay, Mom, love you. Love you.
And we had a
Oop.
comment just come in from, let me if I can remember which computer I'm controlling here. Sam, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share your comment.
Hi, Sam.
Are you? He not sure he's coming on, but I'll read it. Your presentation reminded me of this quote I found recently. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world indeed. It's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead.
Yeah, that's a wonderful quote. Thanks for sharing that. It's a wonderful sentiment. It's inspiring. We need inspiration.
Got a question back here.
I was thinking about your point you made about the conglomeration of newspapers. And on the other hand, you've got sort of people out there like the multimillionaire that's running the Washington Post. Do you see that change in the newspaper business or the news business really being a threat to the continued ability to question what goes on in a democracy?
The idea of newspapers of a number of newspapers being owned by one group or one powerful individual owning a newspaper always introduces the question of competition, which is always good for a free press. One of the successful models I want to sing the praises of at this moment is north of us. A friend of mine is a cartoonist in Salt Lake. His name is Pat Bagley. He is a gifted, funny cartoonist, former Mormon missionary, amateur historian, and a great cartoonist. When his newspaper was about to go under, the Salt Lake Tribune, the only liberal voice, the minority voice in Utah, he and other journalists at that newspaper joined together to save that publication. It still exists as a nonprofit. So it sort of is a model, not unlike National Public Radio. But I think for many, that might be a way to go. That newspaper survives in a way also because it is a beloved voice, a rare voice in a conservative sea. So readers are going to feel inordinate affection for it and keep it afloat. So that's one model. The secondary model of benevolent fat cats like Bezos purchasing publications, for me, that's a fine Band-Aid for the moment because we have on the flip side the same thing happening with fat cats who care very little about our democratic republic, who are funding their own news organizations, whether it's the Mercer family or the Murdoch family with Fox, these weird nihilist news organizations. I struggle to remain hopeful, and I am hopeful only because when I go to the University of Arizona to speak to journalism classes, the young people have ideas and they're on it and they're thinking about it and they care about our democratic republic and they do exist. And they are like that Margaret Mead quote, those small numbers of people who are committed and who care. So I do trust that future generations will carry on the dreams that many of us hold in our hearts for our world.
So contrary to that,
Yes.
I'd like to talk about the electronic media these days, and I've noticed things shift rapidly during the pandemic, even more than they had before. But you have the likes of Microsoft, you have the likes of Apple, Facebook, all of these groups who are taking news and profiting from the clicks. And so the things that dominate my screen and most people's screens are things that are driven for clicks. And you will have the majority of news stories be about Justin Bieber and the health issues of Justin Bieber, or the Kardashians, or, you know, this celebrities, you won't believe what they look like today. And I just worry that we're feeding the lizard brains of Americans and the long-term impacts of sort of this great.
Yeah, that's a really good.
Our days are just inundated with this nonsense, and I can't believe it's not.
Is the word metrics. Even mainstream journalists whom I respect and organizations that I respect fall victim to the word metrics. Let us measure what interests readers. And that's why when I was on vacation in Canada, I fasted from news. And then I hang out with my cartoon buddy. I said, hey, let's check the news. There we go, the news. What's the top news story? Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. You know, the second story could be Japan destroyed by earthquake, but it's, metrics will be the ruin of us. And I see it reflected in the point I made about the column this weekend about Gannett. Their argument is, we don't want to tell readers what to think. Does that mean we want to know what readers think and tell them what they want to continue to think? Oh dear. On the flip side of this might be irrelevant, but to me it's interesting. In Nazi Germany, 39-40, when the news laws were passed in Germany, when newsroom staffs had to be racially pure, and you had to only write stories suggesting Hitler was a great dancer. Well, the circulation numbers for all of Germany's major dailies plummeted. This was kept secret, discovered much later after the fact. Of course you'd want to keep that secret. Just as much as you want to keep back the secret that Mein Kampf was not a bestseller. It was foisted on people. People do not want to be told by their state that everything is fine and wonderful and good. People want a vigorous press that questions. And that is a hope I just expressed, not to be confused with perhaps a fact. I think it is just a hope. I would hope that citizens want to question and want to know. But as for the internet, my only answer to that is a number of my cartoonist friends and I, and some columnists across the country who share similar views, we've become creatures of the internet. I post on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram constantly now. A friend of mine, Chris Britt, who's a wonderful political cartoonist, created a character on Twitter called Crazy Texas Uncle. And he harangues Texas lawmakers with whom he disagrees, with memes that he creates. He has gotten thousands and thousands of hits, reprints of a sort. And so that is sort of taking off for him as print media is perishing. But what is most traumatizing to me is the isolation, the silos, news agencies telling us and them and us what we want to hear and what we want to believe rather than what we should know. And that just simply describes why these are perilous times for a democratic republic and not such perilous times for authoritarians.
On that happy note.
On that happy note.
Well, I want to take the time to just thank David so much. He's been with us throughout the pandemic. He was one of the first speakers that we signed up for our speaker series when we were all trying to figure out what the heck we were going to do in this world. And we really appreciate your continued support and for being part of our Osher world. And thank you so much for being
My
here.
pleasure. Thank you.